you have to keep doing this or to try any of this stuff, you have to have fun. And whether it's just meeting cool people or traveling to cool places, like as adults, this is what we get to do and what we're choosing to do. So don't take it too seriously and have fun. And that's something that, if I'm in a group of triathletes and people are freaking out, that I really try and impart. And even with my own athletes, high school and adults, if they're, freaking out because their data didn't upload, I'm like, well, did you get it done? Did you enjoy yourself? Okay, then that's good. We met the goal.
That is Amy Farrell this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hey everybody, how's it going? I am going to make this quick because I am absolutely exhausted from a long weekend of training here myself, leading up to my A race next month. Oh man, it's coming up in Cleveland, Ohio. So had a big weekend of training trying to get ready for that, and so I am going to keep this brief, get this podcast uploaded, and get some rest and recovery in myself. This week on the podcast, my guest is Amy Farrell, and Amy has a very, very interesting story through her career in triathlon because she was actually a former professional triathlete. She went professional in this sport at a very young age, back before, as she likes to say, kids and everything else that takes up her time nowadays. But she raced as a professional and then actually ended up stepping away from the sport entirely and did not do any triathlon racing or any racing for that matter for quite some time. And so after she was coaching some athletes, and when, was separated from her husband, and she ended up getting back into running first. And because she was going so hard trying to make it to the Olympic qualifications in the marathon, she ended up getting injured, and that's how she found her way back into the sport of triathlon, because it was suggested that she'd go ahead and do some cycling and some swimming as cross-training to try and rehab her injuries. So then she got back into the sport of triathlon and has been very successful at the full Ironman distance, has qualified for Kona multiple times, and was actually second in her age group at Kona by 14 seconds. So she is a very, very high level Ironman triathlete who has taken multiple breaks away from this sport, and has kept coming back. So I'm very excited to share Amy's story with you this week, and I hope that you really enjoy it. All right, so today I am joined by Amy Farrell, and Amy is a former pro triathlete. She's a mom and was at one point in time an Olympic hopeful, and I know that right now, Amy, your focus is on the full iron distance, 140.6 miles. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I qualified for Ironman Hawaii in May at Ironman Santa Rosa, so we're focused back on the World Championships in October.
That's awesome. And did you always have a passion for going long, or did that kind of come later?
When I first started racing, when I was 23, my goal was to qualify for Ironman Hawaii and race there, and then, of course, try and podium. So the first real triathlon that I did was kind of an odd distance. It was about 1/3 of an Ironman, so shorter than a half Ironman. And but back in those days, there were many different races or types of races you could qualify for Ironman Hawaii at. So I qualified in that race for Ironman Hawaii, and Kona was my first Ironman. But then, and then I went back the next year in DNF, and the year after that, I started racing pro. But I would say in those early days, my first few seasons, Ironman, I guess, was kind of the focus because there wasn't a huge emphasis on 70.3 races, and there wasn't a very big selection of them. So it wasn't until I came back later into the sport that that 73.3 was more of a recognized distance. So in my several comebacks to triathlon, the 70.3 distance was usually the focus until 2013 when I went back to Kona, and the rest has been history, I guess, and really falling in love with that Ironman distance.
So how many times is that you've been to Kona?
Ooh, I think I've been to Kona 6 times.
Wow.
So I've done 5.5 Konas.
And so you never even really got into that like sprint or Olympic distance racing. You really just focused on that more longer distance stuff.
Yeah, when I was first getting into it, I worked for the coach named Martha Grinnell, and she had been through some of the ITU races, but also had some success at Ironman distance. And just my running background was stronger than swimming and cycling. And at the ITU distance, you had to be a really good swimmer. And so we applied to get into the OTC and Colorado Springs, and my swim times just weren't good enough to make it at that distance. And I also just liked how much a race could change in Ironman distance. So yeah, that was my focus kind of from the beginning.
And so you were a pro triathlete. You raced as a pro triathlete in your early 20s. Can you talk to me about what that was like?
Yeah, so I did 2 seasons when I first started as an amateur. I guess when I was 23 and 24, I raced age group and had some success. And I knew coming out of college, I had done an interview with a local newspaper, and they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said a pro triathlete. And so by my 3rd season, I had gotten my pro card and raced 1 full season. I think that was 2002 as a pro triathlete, and it was pretty neat because there were a few 70.3s on the circuit, but it wasn't like it is now where there's a race or 2 or 3 every weekend and everybody's tracking it. So there were also less pros. So I would get to some races and there would be like Ironman world champions were there, like Natasha Bodman and Heather Fuhr, and so it was pretty cool lining up next to those women and racing them that year. And I was only 25, so I had, I was pretty clueless about a lot of what was going on, but it was really fun. And then the next season, I started out I always liked Oceanside 70.3, and I started out at Oceanside, and I had a good swim, and then, excuse me, I got out on the bike, and I was like sitting up on my aero bars and looking around and enjoying the scenery, and just not really into the bike portion of the race. But then I got off and I pulled myself together to have what seemed like a disastrous run at that point, but I still think I ran a 1:30 half marathon. And I got home, and about a week later, I realized I was 5 or 6 weeks pregnant with my daughter. So that was the end of that part of my triathlon career.
And just out of curiosity, because you jumped almost right into this longer distance stuff. Did you participate in any longer distance endurance events while you were in high school and college, like as far as track and field or swimming or anything like that, where you were going long? Or where do you think this passion for the long distance came from?
So in high school, I was a mediocre swimmer, but I did things like the 200 IM and 200 freestyle, nothing super long. My parents have a camp on a lake, so I would do some open water swimming, but I remember thinking like 1,000 yards in the lake was a lot, or kind of guessing. But I ran in high school and college, so the longest that I raced on the track was a 10K in college, but I just never felt like I really reached my potential as a runner in college, and I had always loved the broadcast of Ironman Hawaii, and I remember one year watching Paula Newby-Fraser. They did a feature on her, and they took us through a day in her eating and training. And I was amazed at how much that tiny little woman could put away for food. And I think at the end of the day, she ate this like large pizza. And anyone that follows my social media knows that I love pizza. And that, I don't know, just watching the coverage of that every year was like a highlight for me as a kid. So that was just something that it was always in my head that I eventually wanted to do.
Okay. Well, that's all. I mean, that's awesome that you're watching this on TV and now you've turned around and gone there 6 times and raced it, I guess, as you said, 5.5 times. And so we'll get into, you found out that you were pregnant. And as you were going through that point in time in your life, you kind of forgot about triathlon, which to me, this is very interesting, and this is something that I really wanted to hear about, because with something that was such a big part of your life and something that you had such a passion for, how did you lose touch with triathlon?
So it was an interesting time because all the sort of grown-up things happened to me at the same time. I had a teaching job before, but I was single and I only had one dog, and then I think that it was after my second season of racing really seriously that my husband and I got married, but I was working like part-time jobs and training a ton. So the summer that I was pregnant with Ruby, I got a job, the current job that I have now, teaching phys ed and coaching in Tupper Lake, New York. So it was just sort of like, real life took over, and I was coaching 2 or 3 seasons every year and teaching, and there was a big commute, and it was just, it seemed like taking care of my family really took precedence at that time. So yeah, triathlon, I did a couple of small races here and there, but I never seemed to get into a consistent training mode where I would feel comfortable going back to the 70.3 or Ironman distance.
And so even though you were doing some of these shorter races, you definitely weren't doing these 70.3s and full Ironmans. Did you miss it at all? Did you feel like you needed to scratch that itch, or did you feel like you just couldn't make that commitment with a new baby at home?
Yeah, to me, it was really like I knew what it took to be at the top of my game, time-wise and in terms of recovery, and I just never felt like I could get there, and I didn't feel like I wanted to go back into the sport half-assed. I wanted to put my full ass in. So,
Yeah.
So it was during that time I was spending a lot of time with Ruby and her baby jogger, and I had signed up for the Vermont City Marathon in Burlington, Vermont, and I didn't really train for it, but I got there and I was my pacing was all over the place, but I ran a 2:57 off of very minimal training. So that year I thought I would try and hit the Olympic trial standard, which was 2:47 at the time, and spent a lot of time dragging my dogs around and pushing that baby jogger, and missed the Olympic trials time twice in 2 months by around a minute. I ran 2:47.56, and then I think 7 weeks later, the rock and roll or the competitor group sent a bunch of women out to try and do like a last chance Olympic trials qualifier, and they put us up at this great hotel, and they had pacers for us, and I'm usually someone who I never negatively split. I always go out way too hard and fly and die. And that day I was so good. I told the pacers, I said, if I try and go by you, just put your arm up. Don't let me by you. And the guys that paced us were awesome, and I just fell apart over the last 3 miles of the race and missed it by just over a minute. So in the process of marathoning, I really, really tore my body up, and I had sciatica problems, and I was in pretty rough shape.
And so I just want to step back for 1 second, and how long were you out of triathlon, and what sparked you to sign up for this marathon and kind of get back into the swing of training now that you felt as though you were ready?
So my daughter was born at the end of 2003, so I didn't do anything the season of 2003, and then the Vermont City Marathon was in 2007. So Ruby was 3.5 when I did that, and it was another case of I felt like I had a lot of unfinished business, and I just wanted to. I didn't feel like myself. I needed to get competitive again, and I think I've always been. Even as a kid, when we had elementary track meets, I was always the one that was way too aggressive and excited about it. So I felt like I needed to get back to who I was.
And you were also coaching at this point in time, right?
Yes.
And you were you coaching kids or adults or both? And what were you coaching them in? And were you able to kind of pull any inspiration from that to also kind of get you back into the groove?
Oh, that's a great question. Because I was coaching high school kids, and I mostly coaching cross country, indoor track, and outdoor track. And it was around that time I had a really amazing group of girls and guys that were starting to. We're a tiny little town up here in the Adirondacks, almost near Canada, and our kids at that time were having some great success. And I had one athlete in particular that won a state championship in the steeplechase, and it was. I would say that group of kids and the other coaches I was working with really inspired me to get back into it and be competitive again. And I just remember this. I hadn't thought of it in years, but I brought one of my athletes to Empire State Games, and I entered the 1500, and I hadn't run a 1500 in a lot of years, probably since college, and I forgot about that. I had Ruby sitting in the baby jogger on the side of the track, and I think I even brought my dog to the track meet. And this athlete, Wendy Pavlis, was like, she would take care of Ruby, and it was just such a fun time to get really back into running. But that group of kids was really fun to work with. So
And I feel like there's always, as a coach, you always find inspiration, in your athletes, and you always have, amazing athletes and stories like that from coaching. And it's great to look back on those times, and it's fun to look back on those times and think, how they impacted your life just as much as you were probably impacting theirs as well.
oh yeah, big time. I mean, I don't know if I would have without the assistant coaches that I was working with and training with, and without coaching with these kids, if I would have thought to go after it like I did. But it was great. It was a good time.
And so at this point in time, now we'll get back to when you were, trying to hit that Olympic qualifier time. There were kind of two things that were going on simultaneously. One of them you already touched on, so we can touch on that right now. You kind of really beat yourself up, and you beat your body up while you were trying to, qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. And I would say that there's probably a pretty good percentage of triathletes who find this sport because they're broken runners, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
not
definitely.
like not broken like it necessarily in a bad way, but broken. I mean, they have an injury of some sort. They have some kind of little niggle or something going on, and they're prescribed to swim or bike,
Yeah,
and that's what they
yeah,
start doing. And so they are up early in the morning and they're in the pool, and 9 times out of 10 then they get connected with a master's group, and it's kind of just this snowball effect from there.
yeah,
So is that kind of how it happened for you? Talk to me a little bit about your then return to triathlon.
yeah. So the marathoning I did into 2008, and I just knew that it was time to get back to triathlon because I couldn't. I'm not a tiny person, but but I mean I'm not a huge person, but I'm 5'6", 5'6", 130 pounds. So lining up next to marathoners was a little intimidating, but I knew that my body needed the other two sports to be healthy, and I went through physical therapy and tried all these different things. But but my body was finally happiest when I added swimming and cycling back in, and so the season of 2009, I that was when right after they had started the 70.3 World Championships. And when I was younger, I always thought that would be my best distance because I had some speed still. And so I was pretty excited about that. So that year, my focus was to get to Clearwater and compete in the 70.3 World Championships. So, so I think I qualified at Providence. They had a half Ironman in Providence, and then the 70.3 World Championships were in November in Florida. And my sister, who is always my best Sherpa and takes good care of me, my sister and her daughter and my daughter Ruby and my mother came along, and I ended up winning my age group at the 70.3 Worlds that year. And then the following year, I tried to race pro again, but at the same time, my husband and I had been separated for 3 years. But we got back together and bought a small motel in Tupper Lake, which I highly do not recommend to anyone trying to repair a relationship or train for Ironman. But so 2010, I think I did 2 races as a pro, and they were miserable. The sport had changed so much, and so I was still working and coaching full time and trying to run this motel and trying to train, and it was horrible. I think the first race I did, I was the very last person out of the water and never caught anybody on the bike. and I think the other race I ended up with hypothermia and I didn't finish. So so that led to my next hiatus from triathlon until I think 2012.
And so
That's a long and winding story.
Yeah, there's definitely a few things that I want to touch on there. So the first thing is you purchased a motel, like, and I'm assuming that means that you guys actually owned the motel and were responsible for the upkeep and renting out the rooms and doing all of that.
Oh yes, yeah. I got this harebrained idea that this would be a great, summer job from my teaching job, and we really had fun with it. And then it just, once I got back into the sport, it was way too much and way too stressful. I think the last few years when I was training for Ironman, in the fall, the girls that helped me clean would go back to college. So in September, I'd do a 3-hour ride and then get off the bike and clean the motel rooms. And when I was done, get back on the bike for 3 more hours and then go do a brick run. So it was like, a 12-hour day. It was crazy. Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, kind of for myself, what is your town like now? Is it almost kind of like a beach town where it's busier in the summer and then not as busy during the winter months? Or is it, because you're so close to Canada, is it actually busier in the wintertime because you're close to ski resorts?
Yeah. So Tupper Lake years ago had a nice little ski resort. So it would be, it used to be like 50-50, but now it's much busier in the summer. We're in the Adirondacks near Lake Placid, New York. So summer is the tourist season, and the cabins that we rented out were from the 50s. So they weren't winterized. So we were only open from like mid-May until the beginning of October.
Okay, so yeah, that would have been a pretty good summer job had everything gone according to plan. But I'm assuming that there was a little naivety there in thinking that you would be able to kind of pull this off along with everything else that you were trying to pull off as well, which seems to be a pretty common trait for us triathletes.
Yeah, put everything on my plate. I'll do it all. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And so there was something that you touched on there, which was also something that I had read on your blog that I wanted to bring up, because on your blog you had written that during your marathon training, you were coming so close to the Olympic trials qualification, but your personal life around you was just absolutely falling apart. So talk to me a little bit about what was going on there.
I don't. It's hard to remember. No, I think I don't know. We just I feel like my husband and I both had things that we wanted to do, and we definitely didn't communicate well enough, for both of us to be successful. And I remember a lot of those baby jogger miles. My husband was teaching snowboarding at Whiteface, so he was always gone on the weekends. And instead of telling him how I felt, I would just let it fester and go run it out, that kind of thing. And it's something we've been back together since 2010. And that's something, especially this last year, without having to run the motel, we've gotten much better at, and I think laughing at ourselves. So yeah, communication was not good, and I don't know. I think that's something that maybe a lot of endurance athletes with many strained relationships or things like that, you can just it can kind of be dangerous where you fold into yourself and just go train it out. So I don't know. It's something you gotta stay on top of.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, I don't know if you had this experience as well, but just the amount of time spent training can also put a strain on the relationship you know, if both parties aren't all in
Yeah,
on the particular goal. Because, like you were saying, you would go out for a 3 hour ride, come back, and do some cleaning, and then go out for another 3 hours plus do a brick run on top of that. So you were out for, I'm sure, well over 6 hours,
yeah.
on any given day, and that kind of thing can definitely put a strain on the relationship. So did you feel like the training played into it at all as well?
No, because when we split up, I wasn't really into triathlon, but that's kind of one of the neat things about my husband in our relationship is he's an adrenaline junkie, like a downhill mountain biker and a snowboarder, and I think over the last few years we we support each other doing what we do, and I think that's another reason why things have worked out instead of falling apart again is he knows that I love racing and I love chasing after my dreams, and it's a good example for our daughter to see. So he lets me take off for for a week or two every October, or go race when I need to, and I let him take his weekends wherever the downhill mountain bike circuit is. So it's it's a good balance, and I don't, he's not. When we first started dating, we tried to run together, and it was always a disaster. Or he he bought a road bike, I think within a month of us dating, and he'd try and go on 100-mile rides with me, and I would just when I'm in a workout, I want to get it done. And I remember the first long ride we did, he wanted to stop at lots of convenience stores and eat beef jerky and drink coffee, and that wasn't part of my fueling plan then. So so it's almost nice. It's nice that we have our own things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so has he made the trip to Kona with you any of those times that you've gone down?
He hasn't done Kona, no. Um, the the last World Championship he went to, I did Vegas 70.3 World in 2012,
Yes, I remember
and
that.
it was like 106 degrees at the finish line, and I crossed the finish line, and Ruby and my husband Kevin were standing there, and they were like, "Great job, we're proud of you. We're going back to the hotel." and, and it was just too hot. But he used to travel to a lot of the races with me when we first started dating, and he's a bike mechanic, so that's very handy. But we've got 4 dogs, so someone usually has to stay home with Ruby and the dogs. So he's always happy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so much of the coverage, and from following Ginny and so many other people out there who have qualified and raced Kona. Um, I want to go to Kona just once to experience the race. Like, I don't necessarily know if I want to do the race. I haven't quite even been able to wrap my mind around that yet, or the full iron distance. Um, so I'm not so sure that's a race that's really on my bucket list just yet. Who knows? Time will tell. I may make that transition into the longer distance stuff, but I mean, I just like. Can you tell me what your favorite thing is about Kona? I mean, you've been there,
Oh,
so many times, but I feel like for you, probably each time is special.
yeah. It's really neat because the last time, the first time when I got back into triathlon that I went back to Kona was 2013, and I hadn't been there since 2001. And that year I went back with 2 of my sisters, and one of my sisters brought her family, and my daughter Ruby. So we had a nice crowd, and the amazing thing was going back and seeing so many of the same faces from the old days. So it really is, it's like a homecoming, and you go back and even 5 years later, still seeing the same people and reconnecting with people. I think one of the amazing things about social media is you meet these people online, and then you go there and you get to meet them in person. So for me, the last few years, I'm part of the Core Sports ambassador team, and Core Sports is a women-specific triathlon apparel company, and they're run by women, founded by women, and getting to go there and see those women and be around them in person is pretty awesome. And also my teammates from my triathlon team here, or they're based in Westchester County, New York, but the last few years we've had 4 or 5 women racing, so it's nice to go with your teammates. And I don't know, just the energy like in that finish line is unlike anything else.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. I mean, it looks like it. And to be honest, from some of the footage that I've seen, I always like choke up and well up like a little baby when I watch like videos of finishers coming
Yeah.
across for like, it's not even, it's not even Kona. Sometimes it's like
Any of them,
Ironman
yeah.
Texas, or, I mean, because I just can't fathom the amount of work that these people have put in to accomplish this goal of 140.6 miles, in under 17 hours. And
Yeah.
just the look on their faces of just absolute accomplishment is it's just enough to like send chills down your spine. But I
Yeah.
know, like, I was, and especially last year, I was glued to my phone the entire time with the race that we had last year, on the men's side. But
Oh yeah.
it's just, yeah, I mean, Kona is one of those things where it just has such a draw to it that
Yeah.
and I think it's because it's such a large stage.
Oh yeah. And now with so many, it's so much, it's so competitive to get in, but yeah, and it's often not like your first Ironman anymore. But last year for me, I had I also coached triathletes, and you're right, watching the first timers cross the finish line, like, yeah, lots of tears.
And I'm sure as their coach, lots of sweat and nail biting and everything else as well. When that
Yeah.
tracker doesn't update and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, what's happening? So
And
I'm excited. Ironman Lake Placid is only 30 miles away, and I've got a bunch of athletes, so it's going to be another nail biter day.
oh, that should be fun. That should be a ton
Yeah.
of fun. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you, and we'll kind of see, but I wanted to know how your training and your scheduling is different now, than it was, or I guess to kind of flip the script a little bit, since the training didn't necessarily have such an impact. Maybe the communication around the sport and everything else. How is that different now
Oh, I
than?
lost you.
Are you still there?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit.
So I was just saying, I wanted to know how the communication or your training and scheduling is different now than it was, when you and your husband were separated.
So now I I try and let him know, like my race plans and things like that, and when I'm traveling. But training wise, I because I am still teaching and coaching, I'm during the school year I'm up super early and usually can get all of my work done, all my workouts done by 5:30, 6 o'clock. So we have a pretty normal life. Just mom wakes up at 3:30 in the morning to get it all done. So yeah, I have a treadmill in my office so I can get my runs done, and lots of training inside, but time management is during the school year is something I'm very good at.
And so, what are your goals for this season coming up, and kind of over the next couple years? Do you have any aspirations to go back to racing professionally?
If I was 31 and not 41, I would definitely go for it. Um, but I would find, try and taper down the amount of work I had to do. But my goal this year, last year I got second in my age group in Kona by 14 seconds. So my big goal this year is to get back to Kona and redeem myself. There's always portions of that race that you want to do over on, and I would say miles 18 through 24 I want to go and really nail this year. So, and then after that, in 2019, I'm going to focus on the 70.3 distance and see if I still have any speed left in my legs.
14 seconds.
14 seconds.
So I don't know how Kona works. I think it's a mass swim start, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So even though the person who was first was only 14 seconds ahead of you, that doesn't mean that you guys were coming down the carpet together, correct?
No, I actually crossed the finish line, and in the finisher pictures, I ran into her. She was right in front of me.
Oh, so you guys were pretty close together then.
Yeah, I made up a lot of ground in the last mile. I think I made up like a minute in the last mile of the race. So if I maybe had another half mile, I would have made it. But it's not 141 miles; it's 140.6.
And did you know that she was in front that close?
I had an idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I had a bunch of teammates out on the course screaming at me, and my coach trying to get me moving. But yeah. So I'm excited to spend the summer really working hard and trying to get back there. I won my age group at Kona in 2014, so that race was pretty close to perfect for me, but I know there's a better one still to come.
And so you're just trying to maybe replicate that and slightly improve it.
Yeah.
And so I just have, one kind of silly random question for you. I think you may have already answered this for me or alluded to it just a little bit, but with all this training and racing and the just absolute hours and hours that you spend on the swim, bike, and run, and then like even in Kona, coming in second in your age group, regardless of whether it was 14 seconds and how much you may want to relive that, still an amazing day. So at the end of these days, what's your favorite post-race meal?
Oh, my favorite pre-race, post-race, anytime meal is pizza.
That's what I thought. Okay.
In a world where I think, it was like everyone was going the caveman diet and keto and all that jazz, I prefer to still eat like I'm in college a lot of the time.
And is it just plain cheese? Anything on it? Parmesan, oregano, maybe some hot peppers? Just
I mix it up a lot. I think last year in Kona, my pre-race pizza was like lots of veggies on it. When I won Lake Placid last year, it was it was called a grandma's pizza. It was a white pizza with tomatoes and basil on it. It's to die for. So yeah, but my daughter likes just cheese, so a lot of times it's just cheese pizza.
That's interesting that you have a grandma pizza up there, because we also have a grandma pizza here. I'm in Wilmington, Delaware, just outside of Philadelphia, and our grandma pizza is a square, or I guess more of a rectangle pizza, and they actually put the crust in the oven first, and they bake it a little bit. Then they take it out, they spread the sauce over the top, and then they put like these dollops of mozzarella, like fresh mozz, on
Oh,
there,
yes.
and a little bit of basil, and then they put it back in the oven again, and the crust gets really, really crispy because it's so thin and it's rectangle. So that's our
Oh, my
grandma,
God.
and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Oh, that sounds really good.
I'm also a little. I don't consider myself like a full pizza connoisseur, but I do have pizza every Friday. Like I don't miss a Friday. It's just a non-negotiable. I have pizza
Yes.
every single Friday. That's kind of like our end of the week. Like nobody feels like cooking. It's been that way for as long as I can remember as I was growing up, and I've kind of just carried it on. And so
Yep.
I've had quite a few pizzas, and I think that grandma is definitely up on my
Mm.
list there.
Yes. I'll have to try it. I got to find a race down there.
We have Ironman 70.3 Atlantic City. I've been trying to talk Ginny into coming and do that. So that season that you're focusing on, your 70.3 distance racing,
Oh,
you should
yeah.
definitely come check that one out.
Yeah.
It's a ton of fun, and Atlantic City. It's not going to be kind of as casino and nightlife like it was in
Yeah.
Vegas,
Uh-huh.
but they are really just revamping the whole image of Atlantic City right now. And the Hard Rock just opened down there. They reopened the old Revel, which is now I think called Ocean Resorts or something like that. And they're just putting on like miles of additions to the boardwalk.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be. I mean, it's currently a great 70.3 race, but I think the additions that they're making to the surrounding communities are definitely going to make this, an even better race.
Nice.
So keep that in your pocket and try and
I will.
talk Ginny into coming down too.
Yes. That'd be fun.
All right. So I do have one last question for you, a little bit more on the serious side this time. And the overstretching theme, I guess, so to speak, for the podcast is someone who is doing it for themselves. And that's not in a selfish way and saying that I'm going to go do this because it's something that I want to do and I don't care what you say, and forget the rest of the world. It's more along the lines of someone like yourself who was in Kona and, just missed winning that age group by 14 seconds. And, you want to go back and you have a full support system around you who's saying, yes, go for it. So long story long, I would like to know from you, what is one piece of advice that you can offer up to someone who is afraid to start their journey, no matter what their journey is? It may not be triathlon, but it's something that they really want to do, and for whatever reason, they're just a little bit nervous. They're a little bit scared.
I think the biggest thing my father, growing up when I was running track or swimming, he would always say, "This is your kind of day, babe. Go out and have fun." And I'd be walking to the start line of a 1500, like he doesn't know that this actually isn't fun. But now it really is, and you have to keep doing this or to try any of this stuff. You have to have fun, and whether it's just meeting cool people or traveling to cool places, like as adults, this is what we get to do and what we're choosing to do. So don't take it too seriously and have fun. And that's something that, if I'm in a group of triathletes and people are freaking out, that I really try and impart. And even with my own athletes, high school and adults, if they're, freaking out because their data didn't upload, I'm like, well, did you get it done? Did you enjoy yourself? Okay, then that's good. We met the goal. So that's the biggest thing is, keep it balanced and enjoy it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could, agree any more with that. And that's the point of this sport. And it's kind of funny that you said that, because this year, I have the opportunity to design my own kit with this company, Pactimo. And when they reached out to me about what colors I wanted to use, I said that I wanted to make the side panels and the sleeves on it pink. And like, it's a very bright pink. And then I did my bar tape in pink, and
Nice.
the hubs on my wheels are pink. Like, there's just a lot of pink going on.
I
And
love it.
this guy, pulled up next to me on the bike, and he's like, "Hey," I know him, but he's like, "Oh, hey man, nice pink bike." And so we kind of started laughing. And after the race, he says to me, he's like, "So what's with the pink? Like, why so much pink?" And I said, "Because why not? Like, people take
Yes.
people take this sport so seriously, and everyone's like, focused on times and data and everything else, and everything has to be just so, and it doesn't, So
Yeah.
I said that's
Yeah.
that's kind of my way to stick it to the people who are like super super serious, and oh, this is an elitist sport. Like, no, it's not. Like, you can
Yeah.
have, if you want to have a pink kit, have a pink kit. Like, we're just
Yeah.
here to have fun,
Yeah. Yeah, that just why not is that was, as I was getting back into marathoning, that was like a big thing with my friends and I. Like, why not? Why not? Just go for it. So yeah, I love it.
Awesome. Well, Amy, I just want to take a minute here before we get off to say thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story with me, and sharing your journey through triathlon, and kind of what it was like to be so in love with a sport, and then have to take a step back for one reason or another, and then kind of jump back in, and then take a step back again. It just shows how the sport can kind of keep pulling you back in as much as you kind of get away from it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm a lifer at this point now.
Yeah, I think that most of us are, and maybe we'll have some times where we have to step away from the sport ourselves, and myself included. But it's stories like yours that kind of show us that even though you have to take a step back and maybe focus on some other things that are going on in your life, that's not a reason to stay away from the sport forever.
Yes, definitely.
So yes, thank you so much, Amy, for coming on and sharing your story. And I do wish you much continued success in the sport this year. And I look forward to kind of keeping an eye on you through the Ironman tracker, and like you said, from afar through social media as well.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It was lots of fun.
Boom. All right, my friends. That is my interview with Amy Farrell. I want to just take a minute to say thank you to Amy for coming on and sharing her amazing story through her journey in triathlon, stepping away from triathlon, buying a motel, which was just one of the craziest things that I think I've heard on this podcast so far. And her re-entry into this sport and how she's balancing everything and communicating with her husband much more. And I think that as triathletes and just busy individuals, we can all take a little something away from that as well, and not just Amy's journey through the sport of triathlon. And the last person that I would like to thank is you, the listener, for taking some time to hang out with Amy and I and listen to her share her story here on the Do It For Yourself podcast. I really appreciate you coming and hanging out with us, and I'm happy that you found your way here. Next week, I just want to give you a heads up. Next week, I have an amazing interview coming up as well here on the Do It For Yourself podcast. I have an interview with a friend of mine, Tonger, who is not from the United States, and he came to the United States and he escaped from communist Vietnam. And that is all I'm going to share with you for right now. But this is a podcast that I've been trying to line up for quite some time, and I'm very excited to bring you that episode next week. So until then, my friends, keep doing it for yourselves, and I will see you next week.